This is the 415ers podcast coming at you twice a week on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Please listen, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. We very much appreciate that. Is Marc Grandi. I am Evan Giddings. When it comes to losers as a result, I should say, of the NFL draft, not really, honestly, a lot of names that immediately popped into my head, Marc. But I do have one that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. And I'm curious where you go with this. If you had to kind of key in on, and of course, no one's a loser on the 49ers. They have potentially the best roster in football, but someone who, I don't know, might be sweating a little bit looking at the future and down the line due to who was picked, who kind of comes to your mind?
This is a tougher one. I think there's one very obvious one. We can get to that one later. Maybe you have this one. So I'll go in a different direction first. I think it's Ambry Thomas, Evan, at the cornerback position. He's now entering his third year out of Michigan. He had the highlight of his career was picking off Matthew Stafford in week 18 down in Los Angeles to clinch a playoff spot for the 49ers. That was when they were dealing with a plethora of injuries, and he was kind of thrust into major snaps and wasn't terrible, but was picked on by opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers at times, and then did not play a lot last year. His fellow draft classmate, Diamador Lenore, who was drafted, the same draft just a few rounds later, he got most of the work last year. Opposite Charvarius Ward when there was an injury, playing some nickel here or there and that sort of thing. So I think he's already been kind of taken down a notch from when he was a rookie and playing big snaps. But I think the draft, Evan, the drafting of corner Darrell Luter Jr. from South Alabama in the 5th round, I mean, obviously you can never have enough cornerback depth, and the Niners would still like some more. But I think to me, Evan, it signals that the 49ers aren't too high on Ambry Thomas entering his third season. Of course, there's still hope for him, and you believe that he can turn it around. But it seems to me there's a clear pecking order in the cornerback room. Of course, Mooney Ward is number one overall, and they made some other acquisitions this offseason. But I think there's a pretty big gap from Diamador Lenore all the way down to Ambry Thomas in their young cornerbacks. And they're adding another into that mix. They hope that they can get a piece that they could play here or there this season on special teams, whatever the case may be. But I think Ambry Thomas might be a little bit of a loser in this draft, considering if they were super confident in him, that cornerback room would be looking pretty solid. But I think they're trying to see if they can strike gold relatively late in the draft with another corner. I think it might signal something about Ambry Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily throw Diamador Lenore completely out of that group. I know that there's a big gap between him and the next guy. Samuel Womack, more of that kind of nickel corner, but I think anytime you bring in, and especially with the Niners' history of drafting cornerbacks late, anytime you bring in a guy, there's going to be a lot of eyebrows raised as to whether my position is secure or not. I think everyone outside of Charvarius Ward is kind of up for reevaluation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
I think, well, okay, so the obvious one we're looking at would be Zane Gonzalez, right? That would be the guy
Exactly.
who lost the most in this. They took the most highly touted kicker from this draft and a guy that was knocking home 59 yarders in the national championship semifinals. And he's, Jake Moody is in all likelihood going to be the starter. If he's not, as you laid out eloquently on our last podcast, there's a lot of blame to go around San Francisco. But I also, the way I want to go with this, Marc, is the tight end position. And the only reason I throw the entire tight end position into that, George Kittle is bona fide starter, top 3 tight end in the league, in my opinion, due to what he does in the running as well as the passing game. But he does have an opt out at the end of this upcoming season, and he is due quite a bit of cash afterwards. Now, you can always renegotiate. They did so with Christian McCaffrey, freeing up $11 million in cap space this offseason. But afterwards, there is a kind of a significant period of time in which the 49ers do not have a choice of how to sort of let go George Kittle without it being potentially damaging cap-wise. He's on a contract until his early to mid-30s. So I think that with Cameron Latu, a guy that You talked about kind of having a hybrid background. He's very versatile, can block, pass catching. To me, he fits the mold of a San Francisco 49er tight end. Charlie Warner's job, I think this year, I would consider him the biggest loser of the immediate tight ends. But looking down the line, I do think the Niners have positioned themselves nicely at that position to have some further discussions depending on what happens this year with George Kittle.
I agree with you. If I had to pick one of the tight end group, it is Charlie Warner because if you think about what the backup tight ends do, Charlie Warner generally is the blocker. You're going to bring him in on running downs. You're going to bring him in on one side of the offensive line, George Kittle on the other. Or maybe you have one of them kind of lined up in a fullback position alongside Kyle Juszczyk or whatever. You can do a lot with those guys, Kittle included, because they're versatile blockers. That's what Charlie Warner does best. Ross Dwelley, you bring him in on pass catching downs. If you need an extra pass catcher out there, he's your guy. And those two guys are both relatively good at those individualized roles, Evan. I think at this stage of his career, Latu is a much better blocker than pass catcher. Not to say he can't become a better pass catcher, but because I think his best skill right now is blocking, specifically run blocking, I think that, puts Charlie Warner's job in a little bit more jeopardy. So all that said, I agree with you. If I had to pick one member of the tight end position to be the quote unquote loser of this draft, I think I'd have to pin that on Charlie Warner, unfortunately, just considering what the skill set is of Cameron Latu. And then the other tight end that they drafted, Braden Willis of Oklahoma, who you talked about a little bit last episode, he's also a really versatile guy and has lined up all over the formation offensively. And you mentioned kind of in the Kyle Juszczyk vein, who could be kind of asked to do anything on an offensive scheme. Not the greatest pass catcher, doesn't have a ton of experience doing that, but I would argue, again, probably best served right now as a blocker. So there might be another knock against Charlie Warner, unfortunately. So long story short, I think I do agree with you there. One other thing I want to make sure I mention, you brought up Jake Moody, the kicker, and biggest loser is Zane Gonzalez, whatever. I was doing some more digging and wondering why the Niners might draft a kicker in the third round. And it also got me thinking about the other half of a kicker's job, more than just making field goals. It's handling kickoffs. The Niners were a very bad kickoff unit last year. Opponents averaged the third best starting field position against the Niners kickoff unit. It's not all on the kicker, of course, it's on the kick coverage team as well. But you look at what Jake Moody, did at Michigan. First in opponent starting position, second in kickoff hang time, third in kickoff grade, and fourth in kickoff distance. So this isn't just a pinpoint accurate guy, between the posts, between the uprights, but he has a big leg and has had success pinning opponents back deep on kickoff. So I think that's also a reason why the Niners did make this pick, and it's a reason why he is the obvious starter at kicker, making Zane Gonzalez perhaps the biggest loser from the draft.
Yeah, and look, I mean, none of these guys are losers, but as far as I guess position to be lost, I also think like if we're kind of just looking immediately, I think Jire Brown is a guy that could potentially challenge Deshaun Gibson. I know that we laid out the path of Hufanga contributing primarily on special teams as a rookie, got some backup snaps, showed his stuff, improved incredibly from his freshman to sophomore NFL year, and to the point where he's now an all pro. But I do think that the 49ers don't trade up as much as they did. I think they gave up 3 picks in order to move up to get this guy. He's incredibly valuable to them. And from seeing what he did at Penn State, and of course, the versatility he has in the secondary, he can play big, he can play small, doesn't play incredibly fast, but plays better with as far as his game speed is concerned. I think there could be a potential challenging, maybe not at the beginning of the season, but we're going to find out how good this kid is in mini camps and, of course, preseason. I wouldn't be surprised to see him challenge for, snaps at the start. And maybe if an injury happens or, he just happens to ball out, this kid could be potentially a guy that we're looking at this season.
I really hate where my mind went when you said, they traded 3 picks to move up to get
Well,
him. They really value him. My mind, of course, immediately went to Trey Lance, and look where we are 2 years later. I don't say that to say I disagree with you at all. They
yeah, he's
certainly
done.
really love
They're going to trade him in 3
they
drafts.
yeah, we'll find out. They love Jire Brown. I mean, everything I've read about him just seems like he fits the 49ers personality. He fits that locker room. It seems like. Now we'll wait and see what he's like, once you actually get in the season and then when he's around all of the guys. But all of the 49ers seem to just be glowing about the person that he is. Of course, most important for a football team is your football ability. And he had a good career at Penn State, but it does seem like he kind of fits the personality of this locker room as well. So I'm with you. They do really like Jire Brown. I would not be shocked if maybe towards the end of the season he does get some regular run, with the defense, not just on special teams. But I would be shocked if it happens too early in the year. It is generally against the 49ers way to give rookies on offense or defense that much action early. I think Mike McGlinchey is like the one major exception. He started as a rookie at right tackle, and there isn't really many others of late that got major snaps in the Kyle Shanahan era. But I'm with you. They do really, really like him. Now we'll just see how his rookie year goes.